Hey there, Internet. I got a confession to make. I'm a Ukrainian Nazi. Do you want to know what a guy like me believes in? Well, let me tell you. First of all, I believe that all people should be equal under the law. I'm absolutely against discrimination and unfair treatment of people based on their skin color, hair color, eye color, gender, genetics, sexual orientation, race, nationality, etc. I think that no race or nationality is better than the other races or nationalities. I think that we are all humans, we're all Homo sapiens, we're all really similar in so many ways. I want all humans to have equal human rights. I think we should judge actions and ideas, but not skin color or something like that. So why am I a Nazi then? Well, actually I don't consider myself to be a Nazi, but for millions of people in Russia I am a Nazi. Why? What makes me a Nazi in their eyes? For them I'm a Nazi because I don't want my country to be a colony of their dying empire. I want my country to be independent. I want my nation to be free. I don't want our language and culture to be destroyed by yet another totalitarian regime led by some psychopathic dictator in Moscow. And yeah, for Russian fascist snowflakes, that's enough to call me a Nazi. For them, I'm a Nazi and they want you to believe that I'm a Nazi. Because if they manage to convince you that I'm a Nazi, you're not gonna care if they kill me. As simple as that. That's what their propagandists are trying to achieve on the international level. They want the world not to care about Ukrainians being killed by them. Because who cares about Nazis being killed, right? Imperialistic totalitarian regimes always demonize people who want their nations to be free. Look, for example, how China treats Uyghurs. Chinese Communist Party simply branded them as nationalists and Nazis and put them into concentration camps with forced labor, brainwashing, forced sterilization and abortions, taking away kids from their parents, and other inhumane practices. An imperialistic totalitarian regime, that's exactly what Russia is, and it's no wonder that Russia behaves in the same manner, demonizing nations, people who don't want to be their slaves, calling people like me Nazis, only because they need a convenient excuse, an excuse to their own crimes and genocides. Again, this denazification rationalization is not something Putin came up with. It's the same old rhetoric from the Soviet Union. For example, during the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, the Soviet propaganda tried to push the narrative that Hungary had to be denazified. In reality, during the nationwide uprising, the Hungarian patriots sought political and economic reforms, as well as greater personal freedoms. But the USSR saw the whole thing as a threat to their socialist club and to the influence they had in Eastern Europe. So guys, what do you think the Soviets did about Hungary? Yeah, almost the same thing they are doing now in Ukraine. They started killing Hungarians in order to achieve their geopolitical goals. They started what they call a special military operation. In order to rationalize their cruelty, they rolled out the propaganda wagon, talking about how they had to step in because Hungary was turning into a counter-revolution led by what they called reactionaries and fascists. They were using these terms left and right, making it sound like everyone in Hungary fit those labels, basically demonizing the whole nation in order to rationalize their own crimes. The same thing they're doing towards Ukrainians right now. The same thing they used to do towards Chechens and other nations, other victims of their imperialistic ambitions. And back then the Soviet story was like, oh no, we can't let extreme nationalism come back into play. Those folks in Hungary who might have liked the Nazis during the Second World War, they're definitely Nazis now. And they must be stopped before it's too late. We're not simply protecting our geopolitical interests, no, we're saving the world from Nazism and fascism all over again. Just like in the good old days, a decade ago. Oh great and mighty Soviet army, crush this uprising for the greater good. It's justified, it's self-defense. The USSR has the right to defend itself from the Hungarian Nazis. So in November 1956, Soviet forces, along with their buddies from the Warsaw Pact, barged into Hungary and suppressed the uprising. That intervention resulted in a tragic loss of lives and a brutal crackdown on the Hungarian people who were fighting for their freedom. So guys, Russians are playing the same old game, and some gullible people around the world still believe their lame rationalizations. But this time Russians messed with the wrong country. This time they're attacking a nation that is able to defend itself. A nation that cherishes their freedom, democracy and national identity. And this time, because of the internet, the whole world can see what these fascists truly are. Now everyone who has some critical thinking skills and time to do their own research is able to see through the Russian lies and even help Russians break their bad habits, like the habit of killing people in other countries under the pretenses of fighting against Nazis. No, the real Nazis are in the Russian army right now. Not all of them, because different people have different motivation, not necessarily ideological. Some people are there just for the money or something like that. But there are definitely lots of real Nazis in the Russian army. Even the openly self-proclaimed Nazis. Like this guy, Alexei Melchikov, the leader of one neo-Nazi battalion. I'm a Nazi. I am a Nazi. I'm not gonna say that I'm a nationalist or a patriot or an imperialist. No, I say directly, I am a Nazi. Unlike me, he's being serious when he's saying that he's a Nazi. If you don't see hypocrisy in Nazis doing the denazification, I'm kinda sorry for your reasoning abilities. But that's how a lot of Russians actually think. Well, I could talk forever about Nazism and fascism in Russia, but that's the topic for another video. Here I just want to talk about the general trend, the behavior that Russians repeat over and over again throughout history. What do they always do? They attack some neighboring country, commit treacherous acts of aggression towards their previous allies and friends, towards someone they actually used to call brothers. Of course, the population of that country becomes understandably more hostile towards Russia and Russians. A lot of people start treating Russia as the enemy it really is. And then Russian propagandists use this hate and hostility of their neighbors towards them in order to justify further acts of aggression, further escalation and eventually war. They're like a bully who thinks that if you don't like being beaten by him, if you dare resisting, then you deserve to be freaking killed. These entitled, hypocritical imperialists love playing the victim card, of course, in order to justify their inhumane and barbaric actions. Russian fascists are the best representation of what I call snowflake fascists. They play the victim card after every sneeze of their opponents. They'll cry and whine after every offensive word you say about them, remaining absolutely unaware of the reasons of that hostility towards them. And there is only one reason: their own acts of aggression, their own real physical violence and genocides. But no, Russians are the real victims here, because some Ukrainian nationalist said something offensive about them, hurt their feelings, and the snowflake fascists cannot handle that without starting another freaking genocide. And of course, a genocide of a much smaller nation, a nation that seems to be an easy target, because these cowards who always cry how brave they are can only attack much smaller countries. But even then, they manage to get their asses kicked. Russia is a snowflake bear that tries to kill a rabbit, loses a fight, and then runs around crying and whining about a rabbit being too aggressive or too bear-phobic. Someone once said, the fascists of the future will call themselves anti-fascists. And the Russian fascists are the best example, a perfect demonstration of that pattern. While being themselves slaves of their totalitarian regime, they're also invading their neighbors, trying to make them slaves as well. That's what the real fascism is, using violence in order to spread your totalitarian ideology, or to make more and more people slaves of your dictator. And there is even a term for the fascists that dare, in their epic hypocrisy, to call themselves anti-fascists. This term is schizo-fascists. Or I just call them hypocrite fascists. Despite having openly self-proclaimed Nazis in their army, they dare labeling as Nazis people who actually defend democracy and don't want their country to have anything in common with any totalitarian regime. Let's imagine that tomorrow Russia attacks your country. I don't wish for this to happen, but hypothetically, if that happens, and if in that scenario you are an individual advocating for freedom of your nation, you are inevitably going to be called a fascist and a Nazi by Russians. If they manage to call me a Nazi, and I'm not even a nationalist. I'm not a nationalist, I'm not a patriot, I'm just a guy who cares about people and freedom. So think about it. If they manage to call me a Nazi, are you sure they wouldn't call you a Nazi? For them it wouldn't matter if you're a huge proponent of democracy and equal rights, things like that. It would mean absolutely nothing to them. They'll still call you a Nazi just for wanting independence for your country. In addition to simply claiming that everyone who's against them is a Nazi, they will also try as hard as they can to find some anecdotal evidence. Some individuals who say or do something stupid, and they are not hard to find in any country. If you think there's no one in your country whom the Russian propaganda wouldn't be able to use for the demonization of the whole nation, think again. Russians will find such people and use those individual examples to convince the whole world that you are all Nazis, or that most of you are Nazis, and that people in other countries shouldn't care about you and your kids being slaughtered. And unfortunately, this strategy works. Sadly, there are people who believe these stupid accusations and either actively or passively let more people be murdered by the real fascists. Well, today I didn't want to go too deep into topics of Nazism or fascism. I just wanted to share my surreal experience of being constantly called a Nazi by the Russian snowflake cancel culture, even though I'm a guy who is against all kinds of racism and discrimination. I think racism is freaking evil, and if you are a racist, you are a miserable loser. But for an imperialistic totalitarian regime, it doesn't matter what I think about social or moral issues. For them, I'm a Nazi only because I don't want to live in their shithole of a country and kiss the dirty ass of their psychopathic, paranoid dictator. And if Russians decide to invade your country, they will say the same things about you, no matter what you actually think or believe. So please support Ukraine in any way you can. There are lots of different ways, not just donations. I'll be talking about that more in the future, so subscribe if you're interested. And remember that our level of totalitarianismophobia isn't high enough.